Great, we're all ready to get underway. Hello and welcome to Art Forum, wherever you are. My name is David Sequeira and I'm the director of the Margaret Lawrence Gallery, and I'm also the person that has the pleasure of putting together the program for the VCA's Art Forum. And I want to begin the session today by acknowledging the traditional landowners of wherever you are. For most of us, we're in South Central Victoria and this is Kulin Nation, but wherever you are, I request that you take a moment to really get grounded in the idea that, long before we were here, actually there was a tradition of artists working in song, in dance, in visual arts, in ritual, and that their practices, firstly, those practices took place over many, many generations before us, but more importantly, that those practices were intimately linked with healing, with land management, sustenance, welfare, law, and of course, language. Our guest speaker today, Frances Barrett, is an artist who lives and works on Gadigal land, Sydney. Many of her recent projects pivot around the modalities of listening and touch. In 2019, she was one of the recipients of Suspended Moment, the Katthy Cavaliere Fellowship, the outcome of which, Meatus, will be presented at the Australian Centre for Contemporary Art later in the year. She's one member of the collective Barbara Cleveland, who've presented work nationally and internationally over the past 15 years. Frances is currently a PhD candidate in Curatorial Practice at Monash Art, Design and Architecture. Wherever you are, please make Frances welcome.
Hello. I would like to begin by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the custodians of the land from which I give this talk, and I would like to pay my respects to elders and ancestors past, present and future, and to extend that respect to all First Nations people listening to this talk. I would like to thank David for inviting me to be part of this Art Forum program, and to Nick for the tech support. And I'd like to thank all of you for watching and listening during this time of significant change. My name is Frances Barrett, and I'm an artist whose work usually takes the form of performance and installation. And today I will give an introduction to my practice by presenting 4 artworks that I have developed over the past 6 years. And through speaking directly to these 4 works, I hope to demonstrate some of the recurring concerns and concepts and methods of working throughout my practice. And in talking to these works, I hope to lead you into a deeper understanding of the upcoming project Meatus, which will be presented later this year at the Australian Centre for Contemporary Art in Melbourne. And I'd like to ask you to excuse the traffic noise and the flight noise. I live in the inner west and on a major road, so these noises are inevitable. And so because this talk is primarily focused on watching and listening work, it would be ideal if you're listening to this on headphones so that you can listen to the details and the nuances of the works that I'll present. I guess I would thought to start this talk by presenting with this image of Ship of Fools, which is a 2009 performance I did with the comedian and healer Nick Sun. And I think that this work exemplifies my interests in having an artistic practice. And those interests are in the experimentations in embodiment and the experimentations in social relations that are made possible by the process and the framework of art. So the works that I will address today is My Safe Word is Performance, which I performed with Ivan Crozier in 2014. Touching, which is the video document of a performance that I did at the National Gallery of Australia. This is a Stained Glass Window, which is a video installation I produced and made in collaboration with the art collective that I've been part of for the past 10 years, Barbara Cleveland, and a sound composition, Worm Divinations, Segmented Realities, which I developed in collaboration with Brian Fuata and Hayley Ford. And Worm Divinations will be one of the works presented as part of Meatus. And before I begin, I just wanted to inform you that my safe word is performance depicts consensual BDSM play and touching. During this description, I'll show an image of Mike Parr pretending to chop off his left arm. And so in this image, there will be a prosthesis with fake blood. And so how I will structure this talk is that I will introduce each of these pieces and then show a small excerpt of video or audio to you. So to give you a brief background to my practice, I studied a double degree of art history and theory and performance and theatre studies at the University of New South Wales, and I began practicing as an artist in around 2007. I was co-director of an artist-run initiative called Serial Space, which was in Chippendale in Sydney. And we, rather than operate as a gallery or an exhibition space, we focused on live forms. So we presented, sound work, performance art, and even had a debate program. And this is an image of Shane Hazeman's performance that he did with Brian Fuata and Lizzie Thompson as part of Time Machine, which was a 12-day festival of experimental time-based art that we curated and produced in 2012. For 3 years, I was the contemporary performance curator at Campbelltown Arts Centre, working across the live art, performance and theatre programming. And I also work as an independent curator across projects such as What Would a Feminist Methodology Sound Like with Liquid Architecture, and All Is a Listening Party with Campbelltown Arts Centre. I am currently studying a PhD at Monash University, Art Design and Architecture. I'm a candidate in the Curatorial Practice program, which was initiated by Tara McDowell in 2014. And my research focuses on queer curatorial methodologies, and Meatus informs the basis of this research. So in my practice, I work as both an artist and a curator, a role I liken to as the artist cum curator. And I feel like these two roles are imbricated and provide each other with a dynamic kind of tension. So in the late 1970s, the gay and lesbian liberation movement gave rise to gay and lesbian exhibition making. And these shows were often based around the sexual orientation of the artists or around social causes pertinent to the LGBTIQ community. And over time, gay and lesbian liberation, as Tom Collins argues, became more assimilationist. The increasing conservatism of gay and lesbian liberation, coupled with the coalitional politics that was demanded of the LGBTIQ and other minority communities in the face of the AIDS epidemic, led to a new term, queer, to emerge as a more radical and intersectional politic under which the community could be energised. In turn, beginning in the late 1980s and early 1990s, curating and exhibition making also shifted. Curators moved from activist-based or historically focused exhibition models, unanchoring from sort of delimited identity politics, to explore the possibilities of queer as a social sensibility. I want to argue that queerness is not an antidote to gay and lesbian histories or politics, but rather an extension of, and similarly, it is not an antidote to women's liberation or feminism, but an extension of. For me, queer is not a value, but a contingent strategy of deployment, of visibilities, of responsibilities. Queerness is not the anchoring of identity, but rather its mobilisation and potentiality as dissidence, as a nexus, as intimacies. Steeped in historical oppression and trauma enacted directly onto bodies and on our social relations, queerness is forged through the body. And queerness is not an optic, it is felt. Queerness is a practice that exists between bodies. So this is sort of a working definition I'm thinking about at this point in time. It is still, that's not fixed as a definition, but something that I'm sort of thinking through at the moment. So to label art as queer has its complications. As Tom Collins argues, that even on the rare occasion, the logics of the white cube can be made to accommodate queer art. The queer at best is bracketed. a designation emptied of meaning and at worst elided, subverted or erased with all other social meanings and effects. So with this in mind, that is why my practice as an artist and curator is informed by queerness as a verb, as a process, and that is why I choose to work collaboratively and also with the medium of performance. So to begin with the first work that I will talk about today, in 2014, I was invited to participate in Restaging, a live performance program taking place at Alaska Projects in Sydney. Restaging was curated by 3 artists, Sarah Rodigari, Jess Olivieri, and Brian Fuata. The curatorial proposal was for each participating artist to develop a 20-minute live performance for an audience. And my safe word is performance responded to this framework and also to the site of Alaska, which was a gallery in a car park. My safe word is performance was a live performance between myself and Ivan Crozier that explored the intersection between performance, art, and BDSM practices. In this work, I engaged Ivan, asking him to top me for a period of 20 minutes, throughout which he could determine the entire course of the performance. The work was a deliberation on forms of agencies, intimacies, and power. As you will see in the video, the performance takes place with audiences surrounding us in a semicircle. If at any point I said the word performance, then the performance would come to an immediate end. My interest at the time was endurance performance and its capacity to put your body into a heightened state of being. I considered endurance performance as producing a fissure in the chrononormative structuring of bodies, that this form of art opened up a new space for new forms of embodiment and ways to relate to one another. Endurance performance became a way for me to enact the failure of a body to cohere to certain logics of productivity, presentation, and relation. I perceived this incoherence to create a rupture in the capitalist drives, heteronormative underpinnings and patriarchal oppressions that impose themselves on our bodies. This incoherence creates an antagonism to the logics of power that impose themselves on our body and are played out between bodies. And this incoherence I perceive as a queer political imagining. Central to my safe word is the mode of working that I embarked on with Ivan. I was interested in giving over the performance to someone else to determine. With my consent and authoring, I asked Ivan to take on the responsibility of realising the performance, which he took on with extreme care and generosity. This form of working collaboratively has carried through several of my subsequent works, such as The Wrestle and Curator. A significant number of my projects has been in collaboration with others, either performing directly with them or co-authoring works together. In working closely with other people to realise a performance, I am trying to examine the relational dynamics that exist between us to make them perceptible for an audience. So I'm going to play you a short excerpt from this now.
So, welcome to my Safe Writers performance. I'm Barrett. I'll just give you a little bit of an introduction here, just so you know what my relationship is to Frances and how I ended up being here and what I'm doing and all the consent issues and that sort of thing. First, I want to make sure there are no kids here. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so I've met Fran twice before tonight, and both times were to discuss this piece, although I'd seen her perform before. I got an email from her about, 3 weeks ago saying, to quote, "The main play I would be after would be hitting, spitting, urination, restraints, blindfolds, humiliation." It's quite an extensive list. "I'm not into sex in this performance, but more focused on the limits of my body, creating an extremely heightened state and the notion of someone else controlling and determining the session," which is where I come in. And so that's roughly what you're going to see today. And I wanted to make sure that everyone's going to be happy with that there's not going to be anyone triggered too badly by this, and we'll proceed. Okay? Good. I've got your consent. So, Because I don't know anything about you, I thought that I would start by getting a sense of how you react to what I'll do to you. And I wanted to start by hearing your voice, to hear you counting. Because one of the things that this performance has as a parameter is it's 20 minutes long. So I'll set a timer, and at 20 minutes it'll be over. At any point, I should point out though that Francis can safe word me performance, in which case I'll stop, and that'll change the nature of the performance itself. But that could well be a part of it. We'll see what happens. So, can you count regularly to 20?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20.
And so, you know, because I've never hit you before, what's that like?
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
So I want you to start counting.
So I'll move through to the second work, which is touching. Over the past couple of years, I've been exploring touch as a way to challenge museological, curatorial and archival practices. Touching is a previous work of mine that I think exemplifies this research inquiry. Touching is the video document of a performance undertaken at the National Gallery of Australia in Canberra during the installation period of Mike Parr's major survey, Foreign Looking. Mike Parr is a formative figure in Australian performance art history and a practitioner in extreme endurance performances. I was invited to research in the NGA's Mike Parr archive by the curator of Foreign Looking, Elspeth Pitt. During this research, we came across the pink knitted glove worn by Parr after his 1977 performance, Cathartic Action, Gestus No. 5. This is a performance where he pretends to chop his left arm off with an axe. His sister, Julie Rapp, also an esteemed artist, had knitted this glove for him to wear after this traumatic performance as a gesture of healing, tenderness, and intimacy. So wearing this glove, I moved through Foreign Looking, touching the artworks, the walls, the equipment and the display units of the institution with my gloved fingers. So here is an image of the performance, the original performance of Mike Parr. So Mike was born with his left arm ending around the area, around the elbow, and what you can see on the left image is a prosthesis which he then chops off. After which Julie on the left and Felicitas, Mike's partner, on the right, clean up this arm and all the blood and meat. Then, as you can see in this image, Julie puts this knitted glove onto Mike's arm, where he then continues with the performance by giving a lecture to the audience. And this is an extract from the catalogue that accompanies Foreign Looking, and this is Mike's reflection on the pink arm that Julie knitted. It was also her idea, and an important part, I think, for her to sort of as a gesture of care after this quite traumatic event. And then on the right is an image of the glove itself. So this particular work takes as its starting point the embodiment and animation of archival materials as a way of accessing our histories. Performance is used to draw away from the presentation of archives and historical materials as static objects with linear narratives, and instead as a way to understand this material as something to engage with as part of a constant dynamic process. Touching animates archival material through performance. In turn, the institution becomes a site of tactility and embodiment. This work is concerned with the perversity of touch, and performing that within the museum context troubles the preservation and display apparatuses of exhibitions, collections, and archives. I see this as an antagonism towards Western models of display and presentation, of colonial forms of cultural perpetuity, and the market value instilled in certain objects or in certain artists themselves. So it is my way of reimagining how institutional practices can operate and how bodies can be a driving force of change within an institution. As a side note, the curator Elspeth Pitt also performs as part of this action, and what I could and couldn't touch was dependent on the negotiation that Elspeth did with the NGA conservators and also with the collectors of Mike Parr's works that were on display. Also, I chose to perform this piece at night during the installation period, which for me was a theatricalization of a time that sits out of the usual institution's hours, so something that sat outside of institutional time. Upper Cleveland is a collective made up of 4 artists: Kate Blackmore, Kelly Doley, Diana Baker-Smith and myself. And we have been working together for over 10 years. Our projects take the form of video, live performance and installation, and are informed by queer and feminist methodologies that draw on the historical lineages of both the visual and performing arts. The recurring ideas of our works are methodologies of historical recuperation, collaboration and authorship, the slippages between fact and fiction, and the relationships between the live moment and its trace or documentation. This Is a Stained Glass Window is our most recent new work, which has been developed with a sound composition by the musician Corin Aletto. The initiating point for this work was the way that philosopher and political theorist Hannah Arendt described her friendship with author Mary McCarthy. Hannah described it as a thinking business for and with each other. And Barbara Cleveland saw this comment as a reflection of our own working relationship and friendship. And what emerged was the image of a stained glass window as a way to speak of this dense and fragile relationship. We see this work as a self-reflexive video portrait which draws on the aesthetics and conventions of cinema verite, conceptual art and performance documentation. What you are about to see is us improvising within the studio in an attempt to make a video work within an 8-hour working day. We shot this work without knowing how it would proceed. Instead of a plan or strategy, we thought we would depend on the accumulated language and friendship that exists between us. So in the improvisation in the studio, we hoped that this would sort of put into effect our working mode, which relies on both friendship and a long history of collaborating together. We then responded to this footage by developing a narrative that addresses ideas of memory, friendship, time, and intimacy. And this work deliberates on our specific thinking business and how this can offer an alternative support structure for and with each other. This is the installation at Sullivan and Strumpf in Sydney. And I just thought that I would mention that at the beginning of 2019, Sullivan and Strumpf took us on as part of their stable of artists. And this representation is a huge milestone in our practice. As we know, both the White Cube and cultural institutions are vehicles for hegemonic culture, and the statistics of representation by the Countess prove that women and queer and artists of colour are not adequately represented in Australia. And following, again, Tom Collins, who I seem to be quoting from a lot today, the market is attached to hegemonic culture, and all cultural institutions are a function of that market. So as a collective, as a group of women, as feminists, some of who are queers and lesbians, this representation is a significant gesture of a commercial gallery. So let me play an excerpt from this Is a Stained Glass Window. Oops.
Like, will it focus on the floor behind you? Like...
Yeah, it'll focus on the main thing that's in the centre of the frame. So
yeah. Just
try to keep the person in the centre of the frame, because then it'll focus on them.
Okay, great. Do you want to have a go? Or do you know how to use this already?
This is the record button on the side here.
So it was recording?
Yeah.
Do we have a big room?
No, we have a mop though. I think if we decide to clean the space with that, and that will come to the logic. I think we decide on the logic first. Yeah. Okay. I think let's just have a conversation because we're all really scattered.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
should we sit down or just standing?
No,
like I'm thinking, what's more natural?
I think if you're only seeing this, it's probably okay. So, what is the work?
Maybe that should be what we do first.
Before this.
Yeah.
No, we're writing down what we're doing, and then that can be part of what we write down.
Exactly.
Yeah, but then the image of us writing down will be lit properly. And that'll be more consistent.
Yeah, I think we should clean the space really quickly, light the space, then write the plan. That's all part of it. That's like half the work.
Okay.
When we first met, she was wearing a green Angora jumper. Her directness put me on edge. Years later, when we lived together, I would wear that green jumper until it eventually became mine. I stretched it out and she didn't want it anymore.
We should just stop.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, do we want the first thing to do to sit in the space and start talking about what we're like the plan?
I think we should set up this shot first. Because
That's what I mean.
But then
Set up.
shouldn't we also talk about what we're going to wear? Because once you're filming, then we're thinking about how it looks.
Yeah.
So shouldn't we set up the shot, then talk about what we look like, then talk about what we're going to do,
Sorry.
then do the things?
Well, I
I don't know.
think if we maybe just
For how long have we been looking at each other? For how long have we been looking to each other? For how long have we been looking through each other? This is our friendship. It is both light and shadow, colour and lead. A glassy density we see through.
So in 2019, I received Suspended Moment, the Katthy Cavaliere Fellowship, a fellowship for women artists working across performance and installation. My fellowship outcome was to be a solo exhibition at the Australian Centre for Contemporary Art, which was scheduled to open on the 3rd of April. However, due to COVID precautionary measures, all public institutions, ACCA included, had to close to the public. And so in turn, Meatus has been postponed until the time when ACCA can open its doors. Meatus begins with the external acoustic meatus, the ear, to attend to the expanded possibilities of the body and the principles of organising social relations. A meatus is an opening or passage leading into the interior of the body. It is the ear canals, the nasal passages, and the urethra. The ecology of meatus purposely deviates from this medical definition. Within meatus, I embrace other openings and passages of the body to collapse the distinctions and definitional boundaries between the ear, the nose, the anus, the vagina, and the stoma. And what emerges is a conception of the body that eludes the delimitations of the biological body. This collapsing of the meatus is a metaphor for the decentering of the ear and the practice of listening. And what Meatus proposes is a form of listening that demands the entire body, becoming a practice that diffuses the boundaries between senses, like touching and listening, and diffuses the boundaries between inside and outside, diffuses the boundaries between self and other. To extend the parameters of the solo commission towards collaborative models, I invited several artists to contribute new sound commissions to the project. And these artists are Brian Fuata, Hayley Ford, Nina Buchanan, Del Lamanta, and Sione Tomahenga. So the commission project Meatus is an immersive sound installation that will encompass all 4 galleries of ACCA. And I've conceived of ACCA as a meatus into which an audience enter to play the role of the listener. And so it'll be a decentered listening experience with sounds moving through the space like objects. And each gallery will have a different configuration of speakers that produces a different listening experience for the audience. And I guess in developing an immersive sound installation, my primary curatorial concerns were time and space and bodies, so my role became more akin to that of a dramaturg. And I do consider that Meatus overall as an installation is an expanded form of performance. So one work that will feature as part of Meatus is the sound composition that Brian, Hayley and I are developing. And this work, Worm Divinations, will be presented in the large gallery 1 of ACCA. And so Worm Divination draws on the various modalities of each of us as artists. And these modalities are performance art and poetry, improvisation, dramaturgy and sound design. And the composition is based on a series of modulated vocal performances sequenced into segments. And the compositional structure replicates the segmented body of a worm, beginning in the mouth and moving through to the anus. And this worm decomposes language into a sonic visceral force. This Worm Divinations is primarily concerned with representations of the queer body and that representation moving beyond the visual, moving beyond any optic, and rather queerness being presented as a force, as an intensity and as a duration. And the mouth and the vocality, as you'll hear, play a critical role in this piece. The mouth, being the meatus, becomes the threshold from which the queer vocalic body emerges, and it is through the practice of listening that an audience can encounter and feel this body. So this particular work is designed for ACCA's architectural space specifically, and it's mixed on the Iasono 3D spatial audio rendering system and presented through a Yamaha loudspeaker system. So again, it's a decentered listening experience. Spaces move like objects, sounds move like objects through space, and so it's an entirely encompassing experience. I'm going to play a 5-minute excerpt from this larger half-hour piece, after which then my talk will finish. Yeah.
wormhole, mouth, wormhole, mouth, wormhole, mouth, wormhole, mouth, wormhole, mouth, wormhole,
So thank you very much for your time today. I hope that the accumulation of all of these works gives you a broad understanding of my practice and the recurring inquiries into queer relationality and embodied knowledges and performance. Thank you.
I think we just read out the questions.
Sure, I'll read them out. Didn't hear properly, but is the phrase being repeated in worm divinations? That's from Marika.
Yeah, Marika, the whole piece is about half-hour long, but this particular segment is the mouth cum wormhole segment. And so I guess with that phrase, we're thinking about sort of enacting being like a wormhole. We're sort of thinking about different, sort of sitting outside sort of heteronormative, capitalist kind of delimitations of time and structuring the body as such. Also, I guess, thinking about the meatus and vocality as being a way in which, like I guess experimental voice as being a way that carries the body. So I've been doing a lot of reading around voice as being a form of touch and listening as a form of touch as well and feeling. So in thinking through the mouth cum wormhole is to kind of think about our senses of temporal disorientation and physical disorientation, thinking about the voice as being an extension of the body and the voice being sort of almost this like prosthesis that reaches out through time and space. And Archie, it's great to hear that you're listening. It's made me feel very nervous. But I guess with listening, you know, listening with the whole body, I guess, for me, I kind of think about how...
So can I just interrupt? The question for everyone is, I wondered if you could speak a little more about listening with the whole body and how you came to this.
Yeah, I think through a few other of my works, so with All Ears, a listening party, which I curated with Campbelltown Arts Centre, and then also another work of mine, Curator, that I performed with you can hear things, but to listen is to hear with criticality. It's to think, sorry. Am I back on now?
You are.
Okay. So to listen is to, think with criticality and generosity and with a sense of care. You know, there's lots of writing around ideas of deep listening, you know, like Pauline Olivieros, who's a very famous lesbian, radical feminist composer. She writes a lot about deep listening and about how it's a full physical. So she was very much into meditation as well as experimental sound practices. So, you know, I think of listening as not just through the ears, but it's also felt. It's also, and you know, like, and for me that extends to ideas of the body as not just being with our physical selves, but it's also affect. So for me, I guess listening in challenging ways that we listen, we're challenging ways in which we usually communicate with each other, and to do that is to disrupt or to challenge perceived you know, dynamics of power or perceived kind of hierarchies that can exist between us. So in challenging and making more intimate forms of communication that exist between us, then we can disrupt those narrative power imbalances. And to listen deeply and to listen with the entire body is to perceive affect. It's to perceive not just what you're hearing, but also the emotion. It's to perceive, you know, and be an entirely sensate being. Yeah, and for me, that kind of extends to ideas of queerness and, yeah. I hope that answers maybe some ideas of my thinking around listening with the whole body. Yeah.
Frances, thank you so much, not just for taking us through, you know, some of the key works in your practice, but actually really taking us through the thinking and, you know, the thought process that kind of took us to, you know, to the end point of the performances or the end point of the work. It's such a generous act when an artist or an artist curator, in your case, takes us through that, like lets us into that world. We so appreciate it, and we thank you and look forward to the project at ACCA. Thank you to everyone that joined us today. We look forward to you joining us next Thursday as well at 12:30, and we will be in touch with you. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.